No, I'm saying, can we just try a couple of examples of really controversial alleged bidders? Many people say they are bidders. Many people say they're not bidders. Well, one of them would be instrumental music. Okay. Now, I know this is a complicated subject. I'm not looking for a fatwa from you, unless you want to give one. But apart from what's called the duff, the drum-like instrument, which was apparently used in the Prophet's time and was acceptable, many people would say, instrumental music like stringed instruments, flutes, and let alone modern contraptions are condemned because of various hadith. Whereas other people would say, Al-Ghazali, I think, had a different view. I'm not quite clear what it was, but it seems to be dissenting from that. I mean, am I right to say there's no consensus? Firstly, there's no consensus in the ulama about this, so we can't just say, well, Islam teaches X.
Right.
But if that is the case, is there nonetheless a how can I put it, a consensus in a majoritarian position, a minority position and a majority position? Come on, say that.
Well, I would say that there's fundamentally a conceptual problem that Muslims have. We suffer from for a very long time, And of course, I'm not claiming to be the one who's discovered the proper or the right way to understand this, but I'm just sort of trying to highlight what I think is factual, right? Because when we ask the question, what is Islam? We're asking an epistemological question at the same time, because that fundamentally suggests that, okay, we know the sources of Islamic knowledge, right? The average Muslim would never say that Allah and His Messenger don't know what Islam is, right? Of course, that would be withdraw Islam, right? Because they are the source of Islam, the Prophet, Allah, and the Messenger, Islam, ultimately God, right? But through the Prophet as well. So you have some people say that Islam is only what Allah and His Messenger say. Then you have those who say that Islam is whatever the Sunnis say, or Islam is whatever the Shiites say, right? And then within, let's say we focus on the Sunnis, they'll say, okay, the Islam is whatever the majority of the scholars say, right? Without consideration of madhab, right? We just look at it. It's a purely numbers game. If you look at it's a democratic process, if 80% of them say this and, the other 30% would just ignore them. And so 80% determines what true Islam is. Then on another level, people believe that Islam is whatever the four schools say, right? But then within the four schools, there's disagreement. Then they may say, well, is whatever the standard opinion of the four schools is, right? Right. So I think this is the first source of, I guess you say, confusion that we have is about, okay, well, determining like exactly, who actually defines what real Islam is, right? Now, coming back to the question of music and musical instruments, if you study the four schools of Sunni Islam, for instance, you learn that the mainstream opinion, the standard opinion is that, music, right, and musical instruments are unlawful, right? Really? It's unlawful to utilize, stringed and other types of instruments, with the exception of, we call it like the duff, for instance.
And the human voice, I know it's not an instrument, but that would be
the human voice. You can utilize what sama or amdah or nasheed, sort of the prophetic utterances. or Islamic songs, as long as there's not accompanied by any other type of instruments, right? So this is generally we find the viewpoints in the schools. However, right.
There's always a however, yeah.
Right, and I think that this is one thing that a lot of people overlook, or perhaps are just something unaware of, is that there are many scholars, not only Imam Ghazali, who had an opinion about musical instruments which was not mainstream. Now, Imam Abu Hamid al-Ghazali actually makes a distinction between instruments which are associated with drunkards and those which are not.
Interesting.
Right? Yeah. So as if to say that, okay, if this particular instrument is associated with people who actually drink wine, right, and their special clubs or whatever, then you can't utilize it. right? But if it's not associated with them, or that if you happen to utilize that instrument and it doesn't place you in that, make people think that you're one of those people, then it's fine to actually utilize it. He actually, this comes out if you read his Illumiddin, his sections on that. Now, of course, he's not the authoritarian. He doesn't determine exactly he's not the final word, right, on actually of musical instruments. But he goes further and say that the individual who's not moved by harmony is subhuman, right? For paraphrasing him, right? And he said that even a camel, if you sing to a camel actually will be energized, become much more activated, and it will start to move quicker, right, faster, right, on the path, right? So this is Ghazali. But then let's talk about other scholars. There are scholars like Ibn Hazm al-Zahiri, the literalist scholar, who actually says that all the hadith about musical instruments are fabricated. Now, I don't think he's right about all of those hadiths, but I think perhaps it's true about most of them. Right? He said they're fabricated or they're extremely weak. Right? And then you also similar scholars have the same view, right? Such as Qadi Abu Bakr al-Arabi, the great Maliki scholar from Seville, Imam Shokani, the great scholar, the Zaydi scholar, and then also Izz ibn Abdul Salam, who is referred to as Sultan al-Ulama, right? The Sultan of the scholars, right? He's very well known, right? His position was that the hadiths are weak, right? He even goes further and he says that that for some people, listening to music is a source of healing, right, for them. It's a source of healing for their hearts and for their souls, in the same way that dhikr of Allah is a source of healing for people who are much more spiritually inclined, right? He said, of course, it's not the best situation, but he says that for some people, this is what it is, right? So the basic point being that, like so many other things, there's a lot of nuance involved here. Imam Ghazali's brother, Ahmed al-Ghazali, was much more extreme, right? He has a book. He was totally opposed to anything related to jest and play and games and things like that. So for him, totally prohibited music. He didn't he didn't permit any type of games or cards or backgammon or anything with dice. That anything that was going to distract you from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that he was totally against it. Imam Ghazali's position is a little bit more nuanced when it comes to the matter of music, right? And this really takes us back to what examples that were mentioned before by Ghazali when you read in that book about embellishing your voice, right? Ghazali's Kitab al-Ilm from the Ihya in this translation here. That's the Fons Vitae, right? Is it Fons Vitae? Was it?
Yes.
So the embellishment of one's voice while reciting,
yes,
it's looked upon as a bid'ah, right? Now, what's interesting is in the Maliki school, so I'm a Maliki myself. I follow the Maliki school, and that's why I'm much more learned in, and it's in the Maliki school. That it's interesting that Imam Malik's position himself was that it was disliked, at-taghanni bil-adhan, right? To sing the adhan, right? He considered it to be makruh, disliked, right? He also considered it to be disliked to recite the Quran in congregation, or to do group supplication or group litanies and things like that, group dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? So these are all things that can find it in the Maliki school, so this was the default position of Imam Malik himself. Now, the reason he held that view was because he believed that the custom of the people of Medina during his time, the scholars of Medina's time, they represented the true Islam, or they constituted what the Sunnah was, right, during the time of the Prophet himself. So whatever they did not do, he considered it to be Sunnah, right? So he didn't go so far as say it was haram for you to do so, but he said it's better for you not to change the Sunnah, right? If this is not something prevalent here, then we should not introduce it or start to practice it, right? And so what happens is that the school, even the Maliki school, as time goes on, eventually changes or it sort of it bends or it caves in when it comes to trying to uphold these much more conservative positions. So you go, for instance, somewhere like Morocco, and it's a regular practice for them to read the Quran in congregation after Salatul Fajr and after Salatul Maghrib every day, and some mosques after Salatul Asr as well, right? And so they did it. They came up with a concept of they talk about maslaha, it's self-interest. The scholars say that they were concerned with the fact that when people were coming to the mosque, they sort of lost the spirit of the mosque, and they wanted to maintain the spirit of the mosque, so they introduced this practice into the mosque, right? And then many of the Maliki Sufis also accepted the idea of group supplication and recitation, all those things like that as well, right? So there's been a lot of evolution in Islamic law as well, right? And so
I'm still confused then. I mean, maybe the confusion is inevitable, but you said at the beginning that the four schools are unanimous, that musical instruments, that's what you said, if I remember, are unanimous, that musical instruments are just
not unanimous. Unanimous in the sense that they're standard views, because within every school there's a standard view, right? So if you look at the standard view, yes, if you base it upon that, then they are unanimous. But if you consider within the school,
okay, fair enough. But my point is it still stands. So I, as a layman or Mr. and Mrs. Average person, Muslim, wants to find out what they should do about music. And they're aware the standard view, as you've just carefully defined it, is clear, haram, basically. It's an innovation, it's a bid'ah. But they're also aware, because they've heard you say this, that Al-Ghazali, the great Islamic scholar, had a different view. And then you mentioned a whole bunch of other scholars as well, Maliki scholars, who also kind of more or less go in that direction. So it seems to, I mean, maybe this confusion is inevitable, but what is a layman or laywoman to do with all this scholarly confusion? But it seems to me the island of clarity is the standard view of the four madhabs. But there are the dissenting voices. So do we just default back to the safe path, which is to follow the madhabs? Because we're not scholars as laymen. Obviously you are, but I'm not. Is that what we should do? I mean, how are we to negotiate this stuff, and how are we to reach a decision personally for us as laymen?
Well, I think that what's important is to remember that Islam was never intended to be an autodidactic enterprise, right? If we can call it an enterprise. In other words, the human element, the human teacher, the human guide has always meant to be a part of the practice of Islam, right? If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted us to just simply read and just, maintain our privacy away from everyone else, then he would have probably just given all the companions the revelation, right? Give everyone a copy of a book, right? And when the companions, they traveled and they spread Islam, they didn't have translations of the Quran with them that they just passed out, right? The people embraced Islam over the centuries because of what they saw, the character of the Muslims, right? And of course, saying that is to make the point that if you are a Muslim, right, and you are confused about such things, now I would say that if you don't have anyone in your midst to consult, then your default should be, okay, follow whatever the mainstream or the standard viewpoint is, right? However, if you have a relationship with someone, a learned person, an individual, and preferably, and we hope that everyone gets the benefit of having someone who understands a bit about human behavior and development, and they're able to guide you and understand that there's certain needs that you have. Of course, that's very rare, right? But that's what we see, is that such people can actually give you guidance on ways to overcome your dependency on music or television or internet, those type of things, right? And I'm not talking about necessarily a Sufi guide or a Sufi sheikh. I'm not really necessarily talking about that. I'm just saying that, like, for instance, if someone were to come to me, right, and they were struggling with this ruling that they came across about music, they were told that music is completely haram. And this has happened multiple times. There's a brother, his name is Mustafa Davis, who actually produced a documentary some years ago called Dean Tight. And in that particular documentary, he's a friend of mine. I actually saw him just a couple of days ago. Dean Tight, and this is a documentary. He talked about the struggles that certain Muslim musicians were having with the ruling that we've been told that it was haram for them to do music, to actually be a musical artist, right? And how they were contending with those particular challenges. But the problem fundamentally, and I told Mustafa this a long time ago, is that the problem with the documentary is that it sort of presented the options as in black or white terms. Is it okay? Islam says music is haram. Islam says music is haram, right? And here you have Muslim musicians. Okay, how are you contending with this? How are you dealing with this, right? You know, and so, but if those people knew that there are other opinions available, right? You know, that there were legitimate opinions, they're not weak opinions, right? That exist. You know, there's such people. It could be a way for them to actually continue what they're doing, and perhaps actually give them a way to begin to transition into something else potentially. You know, if that's what they desire to do so, right? Mm-hmm. But you meet people where they are, right? And I think that what can happen is that that for many people who are still very vulnerable, right, when they first embrace the faith, that they can be chased away because certain things become just too difficult. It's like a guy becomes Muslim and he has a girlfriend, and then somebody says, oh, you got to break up with your girlfriend, or a woman's been married to a husband for 30, 40 years, she becomes Muslim, her husband doesn't, and you say, oh, you gotta leave your husband, right? So those are situations which require like individual guidance, right? Yeah. Now for the public, the general public, well, yes, we're gonna reinforce what the standard opinion is, right? Right. But some people, when they struggle with these things, and when we fear that they are in danger of losing their faith, right, or being chased away or driven deeper into some type of sin, then we let them know, okay, there's something else that exists. You should take a fatwa from your heart. You know, you have to make a decision about what you're prepared to go to Allah with, right? So that's fundamentally, at least the way that I try to operate with these type of situations.
It's very compassionate. I'm thinking of famously Cat Stevens, as he was known, use of Islam in the UK here, the very famous musician still producing music. But when he became a Muslim, famously in the 70s, at 1970, I think it was, he was a superstar in the musical world, you know, by any standards. He was a global phenomenon. And he gave up music. He became a Muslim and he stopped performing. And then some time later, some years, I'm not sure when, how many years ago now it was, but he had a change of heart, and he decided that after all, he could practice as a musician, you know, with a guitar and other things. And so he's resumed his career and as a Muslim, playing music, of course. And he came under criticism at that time, as one can imagine. But I just mentioned him as a well-known example of the kind of people you're talking about.
Yeah, and there are others too. There's a local brother. His name is Jordan Richard. He actually used to be the national skateboard champion. This was, I believe, back in the 1990s, or you know. And he became Muslim. And once he became Muslim, there were some people saying things to him about him skateboarding potentially being haram, and so he abandoned that as well.
Is it an issue of fatwa about skateboarding?
Yeah. I'm a little fuzzy on the detail. I can't remember exactly what happened, you know. But I also, again, I have a relationship with him as well, right? But you know, it happens to many people. People, alhamdulillah, that you have these people who become Muslim. They really want to do the right thing, right? You know, they really want to be sincere. And so what happens is that once they discover that certain information has been hidden from them, that they become bitter as well, right? You know, so I think while on one hand we can encourage people, okay, yes, follow the standard viewpoints on these issues, that we should not intentionally hide things from them, because ultimately we can't control anyone and what they're going to do. But we can say, okay, well, I disagree with that opinion, right? I think you should do this, but ultimately people want to make their own decisions about what they feel is correct. And maybe in time, if your own or my own opinion was the correct one, maybe their experiences will teach them why that opinion was the correct opinion for one to take. Right?
So it's a very sort of a developmental approach, rather than, well, you've now become Muslim, you've got to drop absolutely everything and completely adopt it. It's more of a process, a journey perhaps, that takes time, allowing for the unique circumstances of the person and their lives and their relationships too. So this is a less kind of catastrophic vision of becoming a Muslim. Well, what would be? I mean, that's a very beautiful vision as well. What would be? How would that be expressed in the Sunnah, for example, of the Prophet? Are there examples in his time where he had that approach?
No, there are multiple examples of that. I mean, there was the time when the man who had come to him, who had had intercourse with his wife during Ramadan, and he pled with the Prophet. He said to him, I've destroyed myself, and I've been intimate with my wife during Ramadan, during the fast. And so the Prophet responded to him, oh, then free a slave. And then the man said to him, Ya Rasulullah, I don't have any money to free a slave. So then he said, then fast for 2 consecutive months. And then he said, Ya Rasulullah, I don't have the strength to do that. And then he said, then feed 60 people. And then he said, Ya Rasulullah, I don't have enough to feed anyone, right? So then the Prophet went and he received some food from the treasury, and he gave it to the man. And then he said, take this and go feed those people. And then the man said to the Prophet, go feed people who are much more poor. You feed people who are poorer than me, right? Mm-hmm. In other words, he said that there's no one more poor than I am in my own village, Mm-hmm. And then the Prophet, he laughed when this man said this to him. They said to him, said, go take this and go feed your family.
Yes.
So that's just one, I think, popular example that shows the way that the Prophet interacted with people, and his compassion, and showing them that while the law is important, right, circumstances can lead to these mitigating, can mitigate, the situation to the point that you won't need to actually be as strict upon yourself. It all depends on your personal circumstance. So while the general rule is what it is, that applies to the average person and that applies in normative situations, but there are always going to be those special situations which an individual will have to will get some special license to do something differently. I mean, you can find many examples like this throughout the seerah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
Right. So, I mean, would it be fair? Could I characterize that as saying that Islam, particularly for new Muslims, doesn't require perfection, but it requires one's best, that one does what one can in the circumstances, but that may not be the ideal. I mean, but then that's easily interpreted and maybe can also be exploited as a way of diminishing moral responsibility and taking it easy, not in the way that you mentioned earlier on, the Prophet saying the easier of the two, but taking advantage of it so that you don't have to really make an effort. And of course, that's not the purpose, is it?
Right, exactly, because there's also a famous hadith, whatever I forbid you from doing, then avoid it. And whatever I order you to do so, then do as much as you're able to. Wow. So when he said, if I tell you not to do something, don't do it, he didn't say to your ability, right? In other words, it says, don't drink wine, right? Don't fornicate, don't fornicate. Mm-hmm. But if I tell you to perform something, do it as much as you can, right? And now, of course, this is understood as meaning things which are beyond what is compulsory, right? It doesn't mean that, of course, if you're supposed to pray 5 prayers, you can just choose to pray 2. No, you have to pray all 5, right? Or if you fast Ramadan, you can just choose, I'm going to fast only half of the month, right? No, you fast the entire month, right? However, right, again, certain people may have some physical ailments which make it impossible for them to fast the entire month, right? All right. Or an individual, again, at the beginning of their conversion, may actually find it difficult, right, to perform all 5 prayers in their times, right? Now, of course, we should encourage them to pray them in their times and pray all of them, right? But if a person is praying 1, alhamdulillah, at least that's a start, right? At least our attitude should be that. You say, well, we can't tell them that it's okay for them to pray only 1, right? You still have to pray 5, But if you are praying 1, alhamdulillah, right? If you are coming to Jummah, alhamdulillah, if you're not coming to the masjid any other time, then mashallah, if you're come to the masjid on Eid and you don't come any other time, alhamdulillah. It's just different people are at different levels of commitment, and and we have to meet people as they are, where they are, but never justifying sin. We can never justify sin, and that'd be either sin, which is a type of omission, right? The sin of omission, or the sin of commission as well, right? So, but we should understand that the human being it develops, right?